Well, welcome to another installment of our interview series run by New Direction and Centinela magazine. Today, I'm so glad and delighted to be talking to Gladden Pappin, who is really one of the more interesting thinkers in what has come to be called the post-liberal faction of the American right. Gladden, I'll say maybe just a few points about your background and the kind of roles you hold. You're an associate professor of politics at the University of Dallas, which remains your home. But you're currently a visiting fellow at Mathias Corvinus Collegium in Budapest, as well as being the co-founder and editor of American Affairs magazine and the Post-Liberal Order Substack page. So thank you so much for being with us, and thanks for answering our questions.
Great to see you. I'm very glad to be here.
I guess, Gladden, we'll just start with the present and then work our way backwards. You know, you're in Hungary now. You've been in Hungary for almost a year. This is a country that you know very well. You were very recently writing about the election result, which saw Prime Minister Viktor Orban reelected with a stunning majority. Really, could you maybe start by sharing with us some of the lessons that you'll be taking from Hungary? Obviously, this is the country that admittedly has come closest to implementing the kind of post-liberal agenda that you advocate for the right, really across the West at large. So, what are some of those lessons that you've taken from Hungary, and how do you see politics there at the moment?
It's a great question. You know, Hungary has really gotten a lot of attention on the conservative scene, obviously in Europe as a whole, over the last few years. A few years ago, there was maybe some hesitancy about on the part of conservatives in the West, conservatives in the United States, to explore what conservative governance looked like in Central Europe. In effect, the demonization by the mainstream media actually did have an effect. People were apprehensive about coming over here or being associated with Hungary. So first of all, that's really changed, and it's changed, I think, because there's been now, you know, more than 10 years, 12 years of successful conservative governance, and that governance, that those sets of policies now have certain features that can be, you know, openly discussed and are drawing a lot of interest among conservatives. Chief among those has been Hungary's family policy. When you step off the airplane at the Budapest airport, you enter the jet bridge and it says family-friendly Hungary, and you think, wow, you know, in America you get a credit card advertisement. So it's nice to see that. What does it mean in practice, though? Well, you know, having lived here for almost a year, I think that Hungary is clearly a very unique place within the European group of nations. It has a lot of unique features that go all the way back deep into its history, from when the Hungarians took up their residence in the Carpathian Basin. It's always been, you know, both in the heart of Europe, in the heart of European civilization from the time of St. Stephen, but also clearly on the basis of its language, something very unique. And I think that it's certainly a unique place. But not so unique that it doesn't provide at least some lessons for conservatives elsewhere. Today, I think actually its uniqueness, sadly, unfortunately, and it's something that's shared in many respects with other Central European countries as well, comes from its normalcy. You know, this is still a European country. It is still a Hungarian country. They are primarily concerned about the survival of their own nation, which has seen so many different dominant outside powers over the last millennium. It's a place where family life is still normal. You know, it doesn't mean it's not a, you know, free and modern society like every other in some respect, but you don't feel on a daily basis that you're having to fight exactly the same intra-country culture war as you do in America. Certainly, when I talk to young people here in Hungary and tell them the sorts of things that are now coming on the scene, I don't want to go on a long tangent about transgender material in like kindergarten classes, but come on, you talk to people about that in Hungary and they're just like, what are you talking about? How is that possible? That's crazy. Obviously the country has to fight around those issues when it comes to making sure that it's somewhat protected from those trends from the outside. The point that I'm leading to with that is I think there is a kind of paradox of good conservative government, but I think it's one that they're aware of here. The paradox is that in a country like Hungary that has a good conservative government that is trying to protect the essential features of the nation, those trends from the outside maybe aren't as visible, aren't as present, and I think maybe ordinary people who aren't super plugged into following events on the outside or following events in the United States or Western Europe might think, well, I mean, that would never happen here. Of course, we've seen over the recent history, very conservative small countries, very conservative regions lose quickly and rapidly their traditional conservative features. We've seen that happen in Quebec or Ireland or other places. So obviously, conservatives don't want to see the same thing happen to Central Europe. So you have to be aware of what things there are out there that could cause a rapid change. I think there's no magic solution to that. What is it that causes liberalism to degrade mores and cause the essential features of a more traditional society to come apart? Maybe it's money, maybe it's foreign investment, maybe it's being part of the English language media network where you have that it's maybe easier to resist in countries that are outside of that language group. I don't know. Again, there's not a magic solution, but I think everyone who comes here, steps into a country and thinks, now, wait a second, I heard on the media that this was like a totalitarian dystopia. I guess it is, if by totalitarian dystopia, you mean a normal European society, with behavior patterns that are that are not even antique, that just like kind of barely predate the rapid decline and in social cohesion, family standards, public media content that were present even in the America that I grew up in 30 years ago. So, and people are interested in Hungary now. They want to see what's going on in the Central European countries, and I think that Hungary has an awareness both of its unique place in the group of European nations, those unique features of its history and identity that obviously aren't replicable, aren't easily imitated. If preserving traditional culture depends on having a really, really difficult language, well, we can't just like snap our fingers and make that happen. And in Western Europe, where everyone shares kind of a similar language base or something. So I don't know if it's something super unique like that. I don't think it is, but that would make it difficult to imitate. But instead, Hungary, in spite of being a unique country, has always been close to the heart of the European nations, close to the heart of the European project. And I think today the feeling is something like, Hungary understands the original rationale for the European Union. Hungary understands, what brought the group of European nations together, why it was necessary, and they see themselves as still understanding the fundamental reasons for that, while many of the other actors in Europe and Western civilization have lost their way. So it's somehow a key part of Europe and Western civilization, and yet also a repository for features, habits of life, even methods of governance that are forgotten elsewhere.
Yeah, a really terrific answer and very thorough, Gladden. I mean, you've really explained why it is that many thinkers like yourself and the American right are taking an interest in what's going on in Hungary. And I totally see your point there, that there's been this inflection point. I mean, a few years back, really Hungary, and no other European country for that matter, was really held up as any sort of example or model to follow for America. And I think in the recent past, I mean, you've been a part of this trend. There's a growing segment of the American conservative movement that is asking itself, why are we not learning from what's working in Hungary in terms of, you mentioned family policy, border policy, and all of these important questions that conservatives in America are having to grapple with as well. I wanted to follow with a question. As like I mentioned, you're obviously a scholar, you're an academic, you teach politics in Dallas and now in Hungary, but you're also an editor and a writer. You're the co-founder and editor of American Affairs, which you and I have gone back and forth about this in the past. My interest in the magazine, but American Affairs, I think I would say, is really the most interesting publication on the right at the moment. It's a journal. It's a journal of policy ideas. I would really, in fact, encourage people in Europe as well to read your pieces, your essays. But just for now, I thought I'd ask you, what is the mission of American Affairs? What are you hoping to achieve with the essays that you write and you commission? What is the kind of debate that you're hoping to spark, and what are some of the policy issues that you focused on at the magazine?
Well, first of all, thanks for your kind words. And a point of clarification, I am the co-founder, but the deputy editor of American Affairs. My colleague Julius Krein and I founded American Affairs in 2017. And I think the mission is best explained by the background of that time, because the features of the post-2016 world, I believe, are still coming into view. More people are starting to recognize them each year. So what was the situation in 2016? Well, there were two main political earthquakes, if you will. There was Brexit, which indicated that there was a sharp turn within the anticipated perpetual increase of the European Union toward unity and global harmony or whatever. And then there was Donald Trump in the United States. At the time that we started writing, Trump was portrayed as just a madman. There was nothing serious, no fundamental political concerns that were driving either him or his voters. They were, purely bad, and so was he. And our perspective was that, well, certainly there were a lot of maverick characters involved, both in the Brexit campaign and in Trump himself, but together they marked maybe not the first point, maybe not the last point, but a major point in the end of the post-1990s consensus that global liberalism, would spread itself everywhere and become the basis for a harmonious global civilization. Trump attacked that in a couple of ways. He attacked the so-called Washington Consensus in economic policy, which was the set of neoliberal policy instruments that were basically exported by the United States as a model all over the world. And he attacked the foreign policy consensus, which had led to the interventions in Afghanistan and Iraq, not to mention other American interventions as well that were, motivated by or partly wrapped up in the desire to spread, global liberal democracy or something like that. So we wanted to provide a platform. This is the simple mission. We wanted to provide a platform where serious contributors from the left and the right would be able to describe those trends, talk about what their effects are in politics, the economy, culture, and society as well, and propose policy solutions or propose new ways of thinking about policy areas. So we've sought to do that in everything from migration and economic policy, evaluation of the effects of this neoliberal society, if you will, on culture as a whole. What is the culture that's produced by this type of capitalism, if you will. So within that framework, we've attracted and been honored to publish a great array of authors who are starting to see the same point. I think the events of this year, after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, prompted another set of thinkers, maybe more liberal ones, to, in essence, somehow both give up part of the global project of spreading liberal democracy and maybe double down on it at home as well. You saw people like Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, say in his letter to shareholders, I believe it was in March, that the era of globalization is over. Rather than thinking that Western corporations, by their very existence, spread liberal democracy wherever they go, you see Western corporations pulling out of Russia. This clearly indicates a shift in the codes of belief around how liberal democracy would be spread. So I think each year we seem to accumulate another major kind of element in that. I would call it an emergent post-liberal order. The features of a world that is coming into existence or already here, that is no longer based on an assumption that the liberal values and the mechanisms of spreading liberal democracy are functional, no longer based on an assumption that those will function in the same way. So that's really what American Affairs is for, and I would like to think that that's how will remain relevant for a long time to come, because the birth pangs, if you will, of the post-liberal order, in its good features and bad, of course, will take some time to continue to come into existence. And in the meantime, we'll be here publishing 4 times a year. And thank you for plugging it for the European audience as well. In spite of the name, we publish a lot on European politics, Asian politics, Chinese politics, and publish some European thinkers and politicians as well. So hopefully it'll continue to be a meeting place for people on both sides of the Atlantic who are interested in those phenomena.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really encourage folks to subscribe as well. I mean, the magazine is very affordable. And you've published Professor Legutko, who's actually a past interviewee of this series, and other European writers. And all of it, I think, in the magazine is incredibly timely and relevant. And I'll just stress that it really is this sort of journal type magazine where the articles are almost like papers, because they're really deep dives into thorny policy issues. And
what you're trying to say is that it might sit on your coffee table, but that's why we publish it every 3 months. So you can get it, and they're really long articles, but you can put it there, and when the time is right, then you can read one. That's what you're saying. But
exactly what the type of magazine that it is. Now, you've mentioned obviously some of this in your previous answers, Gladden, but I was hoping you could maybe share a little bit more about how you assess the state of the Republican Party. We've talked about the broader kind of conservative movement, but if we focus on the GOP specifically, we're just a few months away from the 2022 midterms. You recently gave an interview to L'Incorrect, the French magazine, where you explained that American politics is becoming more polarized. I think, if anything, the leak of a Supreme Court ruling that would overturn Roe v. Wade is if anything, a sign of that growing polarization. And I was hoping you could maybe situate us in kind of how much the GOP has changed since, say, the Trump years. How much more does it need to change? What are some of the risks that you see cropping up? You also authored a very interesting New York Times op-ed essay in February, along with Sora Damari and Professor Batri Manin, where you spoke of the risk that the GOP could get overtaken by the hawks, the foreign policy hawks. And I guess that's just one aspect of the change that's going on in the party. But what's your assessment of the of where the party is at the moment, and how do you see evolving? How do you see it evolving in the next few months?
Great question. Obviously, a capacious one that involves many different moving parts. I'll try to cut through the different. Try to make a stab at it. So, well, I think the main thing that I like to keep in mind when evaluating what's going on in the Republican Party, and really any political party, is that you have static parts and moving parts. And everything concerns the balance of energy between those. Is the fundamental establishment of the Republican Party kind of going strong and in power? Maybe it is in some issues, maybe it's less so in others. Come back to that. Where are the marginal shifts among political actors? And I think what happened in 2016 is that the Republican Party was shocked by having a marginal shift at the position of president. So rather than having a big party with a couple of maverick Tea Party politicians being elected in the 2010 midterm elections, you had the earthquake resulting from a not even just a marginal shift, but a major shift at the presidency. And much of the pathologies that you saw between 2016 and 2020, or basically over the course of Trump's presidency, concerned that fact. You had the party establishment never really absorbed Trump into the system and kind of wanted to expel him. And you had the same motivation, same desire from the so-called deep state or swamp, or the Washington bureaucratic administrative class as well. But the reasons that Trump came to power were not simply because of his own maverick character. There were movements in the population as a whole, in dissatisfaction with declining job prospects, large swaths of the country that had lost out on globalization and the promised neoliberal utopia. During 2016, there was, not in any way by a conservative or right-wing theorist, but a standard economist named David Autor at MIT. He either put together or was involved in putting together a website called the China Shock, which showed specifically those counties in the United States which had suffered after China's admittance to the World Trade Organization and the associated changes in trade law and governance that led to the departure of much of American manufacturing. And basically, it's not a one-to-one correlation, but it's Western Pennsylvania, it's Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, Wisconsin, places like that. I was living in Indiana at the time, so very easy to feel up close that these were towns and cities that were, did not feel that they had their best years in front of them. So there were fundamental changes in the electorate, fundamental things that were coming into view that caused that shift to take place. So what's happened since the Trump era? What happened during those 4 years? Well, I think the main thing is that GOP voters now recognize that the big corporations are not their friends. And that's a change in the voter base that, again, has caused some stress with the party establishment. In the 1990s, any conservative Republican voter, say listening to talk radio or voting for the GOP in 1994, had a very simple thought around this matter. We want lower taxes. You want the freedom to operate SMEs. Corporations are being targeted by big government. Big government is bad, et cetera, et cetera. Well, that the articulation of that agenda in the 80s and 90s, it required or went along with building out a huge think tank architecture in Washington, D.C. It's still there, hasn't gone away. American Enterprise Institute, Heritage Foundation, the big conservative think tanks. But the big corporations now, they spent 30 years moving manufacturing jobs overseas, adjusting policy to their liking in that respect. And now the biggest corporations, the marquee corporations, are Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google, the so-called FANG stocks, as they're sometimes described. Twitter, there's been some changes to Twitter recently, as you know. But people realize that those corporations are no longer defending classic American values or classic Western values. You have these incredible leaks from inside of Disney, which maybe has always had its problems, but it was a classic vehicle of Americana. Now it's become this place for the aggressive, so-called woke ideology for LGBT content aimed at children, and you see these leaks from inside these organizations where they're pushing this in all their board meetings. And even as someone just watching the general economy, you have to think, like, how is this helping the American economy to just focus on these bizarre cultural issues? So there's that. Trade policy change during Trump. The Biden administration has actually continued some of that. We've had as you said, maybe the word polarization is overused, but a kind of increased politicization around issues that previously we thought shouldn't be politicized, like science policy, the COVID responses. Basically, what you have now, just to put an end point on this, what I'm saying is that Trump was the result of a lot of genuine movements in the voter base. Even though he's gone for the moment, those haven't gone away. In fact, people are even more aware of those problems today than they were in 2016. Arguably, inflation's higher, the market's falling, job prospects are not as great as they seem in the statistics. Everyone knows that. And at the same time, you now have a younger crop of politicians entering the GOP. You have more small organizations like American Affairs that are trying to make a difference on the ground in Washington, like American Compass, American Moment, numerous other organizations that, none of which enjoys the budgets of the gigantic GOP aligned think tanks, but which I think are all having a disproportionate impact. So within the party, that's the kind of there are more skirmishes around that divide. You had J.D. Vance in Ohio is a pretty good example. Some elements of the old GOP establishment, realizing that Trumpism is still popular with the base, are trying to pass themselves off as MAGA, or MAGA's become this kind of brand that they inject themselves into. That dynamic took place in the Ohio Senate race as well, where everyone was just competing over who's the legitimate representative of Trumpism in Ohio. The establishment candidates pointed out that J.D. Vance had been opposed to Trump in 2016, but Vance got the Trump nomination. His policies are more in line with that, concern for trade, immigration, more skeptical view of foreign interventionism by the GOP. So, basically, as I said, we had the big impact of Trump. Turned out to be not just unique, not exclusively a random thing, but connected to deeper issues. And those issues, those fundamental transformations, those problems that are being experienced by the base, are giving political entrepreneurs like J.D. Vance and other younger politicians who are aligned with this new vision for the GOP. They're giving them momentum. They're taking advantage of the opportunity. So I think basically, to go back to where I started, you still have that static portion of the GOP that wants the same policies that it always has had, the famous three-legged stool of notional social conservatism, fiscal discipline, small national government, and except for the military-industrial complex, and aggressive foreign interventionism. That establishment is still there, but a lot of the energy is around, you could say, like more effective versions of the approach inspired by Trump. So obviously, we'll see what happens. It seems like with the Roe versus Wade decision, it could be another long summer in the United States. So at the moment, we're both sitting here in Europe. So I'm just, I myself am just watching the images from afar. So we'll see whether America can hold it together this summer. And in any event, it will be an exciting few years on the right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the reasons that I think Europe is very lucky to have you for however long you'll choose to stay. The reason that we need people like you is that these challenges that the right is facing aren't all that different. I mean, some of the same phenomena that you just laid out in terms of the realignment of the GOP. Similar things are happening in conservative parties in Europe, obviously with differences, but I think the parallels are interesting, and we need people who are fluent in both sides of the Atlantic, who understand America and Europe, and who are willing to spend time in both, as you have. So this really near the end of the conversation, where this is all the time we have for today. But thank you so much, Gladden, again, for answering our questions. This has been an interview, part of the Rediscovering Conservatism webcast series by New Direction and Centinela magazine. Gladden, thank you again so very much, and thank you all for watching.
Thank you, sir.